Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Do a Review from
Subpixel.
My name is Ian Gibson. I'm one of the review writers, and with us again today we have Will Crosby, also another reviewer and general handyman around the site. Does that sound accurate, Will?
That's pretty accurate.
Yeah, fixing pipes and fixing leaky doors, things like that. So the game we're going to be talking about today is Absolver by developer Slow Clap and published by Devolver Digital. So, Will, how would you describe this game?
I would describe this game as a open world fighting game, roguelite sort of thing.
Yeah, I think that's an apt description. It's kind of like as much as I hate this term. Actually, that's not true. I don't hate this term because it's very applicable to a lot of things. It's kind of this Dark Souls-like fighter.
That was the term I was holding off on using.
I know, but I think it fits very well with this game, with a lot of the things that it's trying to do, and that there are, small kind of condensed areas, and you are going through these areas and fighting. I guess you would just call them trash, right? Is that an RTS term or like a MOBA term? MOBA's creeps, right? Just the general population.
Yeah, I like. You just mean the enemies, so like ads or trash or whatever.
Yeah. So they're scattered around the map, and you can run by them or you can fight them for experience. And then there are bosses, and you have essentially, I think the best way I heard it described was fighting as a dance almost. It's fighting, but it's not in the Dark Souls style in terms of like a heavy and a light, and it's weapon based, and it's also not like Street Fighter or Tekken or any other fighting game, 2D playing fighting game-esque. It's kind of hard to describe. How would you describe it?
Yeah, I kind of agree. It's like in the middle plane there, because when this game was first announced, I was like, oh, sweet, I like this art style, it looked really cool, but I don't hate fighting games, I just don't play fighting games. So I was really concerned I wasn't going to be good at this, or I wouldn't be able to get the whole journey out of it. And it really did the opposite there. Like you said, it's very Dark Souls-like. You can tell these developers really like Dark Souls and those Souls games. It's very well designed after those as reference. But I would really describe it as just a mismatch of roguelite and Dark Souls and a little bit of open world.
Yeah, there's definitely a lot of kind of wandering through an area and slowly discovering paths that take you back to a familiar place. And recognizing that an area isn't just a series of rooms connected to each other, that there are a lot of pathways and doorways and different enemies in different parts of it, which is kind of the big takeaway that I had playing Dark Souls. The little bit that I did of the first game is that the level design was very well done, and that you could be in a single area and see a tower or see a cell, and you're not sure how to get there, but eventually you will loop back to it and kind of discover everything there is about the level. And that's kind of what I appreciated about Absolver in their level design, all the paths. But I didn't feel like it was as well designed in terms of I kept getting almost lost. Not really lost, but slightly disoriented. And when I would discover these new paths, it was a relief because it made me feel like I was less likely to get turned around in the area. Did you kind of encounter that as well?
Yeah, 95% of this game was me being lost and trying to find the quote-unquote mini-bosses because they were numbered, but I never found them in the correct order. I would say this game is well-designed when you finally get to the spot and you realize how you were supposed to get there, but that's not the way you got there. So it's well-designed in theory, but not in practice.
Yeah, definitely. And I think the big problem for me was I think there was a very good article about Disney World and Zelda Breath of the Wild, just to bring in some complete non sequiturs to this discussion, but I promise I'll bring it back around. They were talking They were talking about how when you're in Disney World, you can see the castle from anywhere in the park. And there's a couple other big points, I think there's a big sandstone red rock formation in the park as well that you can use as sight lines. So you can always look and say, oh, the rock's over there, and I know we need to go to the ride next to the rock, so we'll head in that direction. And so Zelda the Breath of the Wild does that as well in terms of it's, even though it's a big, huge open map, it's hard to get lost because there are always things on the horizon or things around you that you can look at and use as reference points. So even though you don't necessarily have a compass or waypoints or something on the ground telling you where to go, you always know kind of which direction you're facing and where the thing is that you want to go towards. But I think with Absolver, it doesn't really do that well enough in that you could kind of see some of these spaces that you needed to get to for these hidden bosses, etc., but it was very rare that you would actually get to the correct spot where you could see the kind of small arena you needed to fight in, and then it was just a whole different matter trying to find your way there, finding these very, very obscure hidden pathways. It kind of became more of a game about hide and seek than it was about fighting.
Yeah, that bothered me. I never felt like when I play games, I like to follow the right path, and I felt like I was never following the right path.
Yeah, definitely. And so that kind of became my last, I want to say of the last hour and a half that I played, at least an hour of that was just trying to find, like you were saying, those last 2 or 3 marked ones, which are basically the mini bosses you have to defeat before you can fight the final boss in the game. And I couldn't find them, and I had to message you to ask where one of them was because it was just getting so frustrated. I knew I was leveled up. I knew I was ready for the fight. I knew I could take them down and beat the game, but I just couldn't find these mini bosses.
Yeah, that mini boss you messaged me about, I spent a solid, focused 35 minutes of, exploring every wall, trying to hit every door to see if I could open it, and trying to figure out you get a map location when you're at your altar, and it doesn't give you directions, so I knew it was right next to me, but I could not find it. And finally I found it, and it is the worst possible location ever, and no one will find that in an easy amount of time.
Yeah. So I think the other thing I was hoping we could talk about is kind of the enemy design, and not just the mini bosses, but also the general population. How did you feel about those guys?
It was a bit varied. Some of them were really easy, and some of them really took a toll on you. I think I ended up kind of figuring it out. The ones who looked tired or were lying down or looked kind of like zombies were usually the ones who were kind of easy. And then there were guys who looked like looting, and they were a little bit harder. And then there were just people who stood there with their arms crossed, ready to fight you, and they seemed to be the hardest. That's kind of the conclusion I came to. I don't know if that's designed into it, but maybe it's just the way I fought them. But I thought the general population was well scattered out to give you a good fight, but sometimes it could get overwhelming, even in an area you've been through 100 times, and you just ended up dying.
Yeah, that's pretty interesting though, the different stances of the enemies, like their idle animations. I didn't notice that. Not to say that I don't think it's accurate, but if it is intended, that's pretty cool design now that I think about it. Because in most other games you have varied enemy types. So you have, taking Halo as an example, you have your little grunts, and then you have your jackals, and you have your elites. So just by raw appearance, size of the enemy, you can tell if they're easier or more difficult. But in this game, because everybody's basically a human, you have to rely on those other cues to tell you how difficult this enemy's going to be. That's pretty interesting.
They'll sometimes just out of the gate hit you hard, and you're like, so this is what this fight's going to be. And you have to make that decision of, do I run or do I want easy XP or easy way to learn a new move?
Yeah, and I think that's a good segue into kind of the fighting system. So, if I remember correctly, there's 3 fighting styles you can choose from. Is that right?
Yeah, I think there's 3 or 4. I didn't make a second character, so I didn't get a chance to go back and see what you could choose from at the beginning.
Yeah, so I honestly, I'm not really sure exactly what the differences are. I'm not a very big fighting game guy, so all these little minutia and details of the game design I'm probably completely missing on. But there's a definite difference you can tell when you're fighting somebody of a different style. But I can't really describe. I know one of them's very, very fast, and there's a heavy hitter, and then I think both of us kind of picked the medium one. Does that sound right? The kind of the
Yeah,
fast but heavy hitting.
yeah. They had little, was it star ratings or whatever to tell you how difficult it was, and I think I picked the middle one.
Yeah, that's right. That's how I found the one that I picked. I wanted to actually enjoy the game and not be endlessly frustrated by my inability to play fighting games.
For sure.
So I think the other interesting thing is that so the fighting in this game, I'm just trying to figure out how to describe it. You have, I don't think they called it light and heavy attacks. I can't remember the exact terminology, but basically,
Yeah, we can just say light and heavy.
yeah. So you have stances, which are basically, I think it's based on how your feet are oriented, in terms of left foot forward, right foot forward, and then you're turned around slightly. So basically, there's 4 stances, each corresponding to a corner in this small diagram in the bottom of the screen. And from those stances, whichever stance you start in when you start your combat, or when you throw your light or heavy attack, determines which attack you are throwing. So, and then it goes off from there. So, for example, your light attacks, you can have 2 or 3 move combinations. So, if you're in a certain stance and you throw 2 moves, it'll do move 1, move 2. If you're in a different stance, it'll do move 4 and more, move 5. And something I discovered late in the game, even though I knew it was in the game, is that you can customize all of that. Did you stumble across that as late as I did?
Yes, I stumbled across that very late. It tells you can do it, and I kept trying to, and it wasn't. I finally realized I believe you have to be in an altar to do it, and so then I could go into the practice mode and switch a bunch of stuff up. And when I figured that out, we both don't play fighting games, so I set all of my moves to the highest damage ones, which are also the slowest moves. But when I play Dark Souls or any fighting game, I choose a heavy, so it kind of worked out for me. So I kind of just rolled with it. But I thought that system of letting you choose whatever moves you want to assign to light or heavy was really cool.
Yeah, I think my big problem with it was I knew the game could do this because it's in some of the marketing and it's in a lot of the talk around the game. And so as far as I could tell, you have to go into the menu that lets you kind of choose your equipment and check your stats, etc. And then there's a button that says practice, and that puts you in a practice mode against a dummy that's not attacking you. And then in that practice mode, you can edit your fight deck. And that for me was so buried and convoluted that it took me a while to find it, because I thought, okay, I'll unlock it eventually because I don't see it on any of these main screens. And then once I finally got in there and realized I could edit it, like you're saying, it's a great mechanic, but I think it's just too buried.
Yeah, I think that speaks to the entire game. Is it's got all these great mechanics and great little menus, items you can get, all this stuff, and I think it all kind of gets buried in the design of the menus and the design of the game.
Yeah, and so I think it's just going back to the mechanics for a bit, like you're saying, there's a lot of good stuff in there, and they may have told me at some point exactly how it worked, but as the game went on, I found out that I was learning how to do things and learning why I should do those things a bit too late in the game. So like around 75 or 80% of the game done was when I really started blocking more, so that, because I think as you block, you are learning moves that are hitting you while you are blocked. Is that how it works?
Yeah, so there's a very, as happens in Dark Souls, there's those random characters who are around that you can talk to, and so one of them cryptically says something about you won't learn from an enemy unless you win. Only through victory do you gain knowledge. Something like that. Probably some sort of famous quote. But so when you successfully block or use one of your abilities against an enemy, a particular move they use against you when you block starts to fill up this little circle with a picture of the move. So as you fight more people of a different style, you slowly learn their moveset. and once it fills up, you learn it and you can add it to your deck.
Yeah, that's a pretty cool mechanic. The only thing that that kind of started to bug me about that though was I noticed that when you're blocking, you are draining stamina as they are hitting you, and so it kind of got to this point where I was like, you know what, my fighting style, I don't want to block. I want to back away from them, let them swing a couple times, maybe dodge it, and then punch them in the back of the head. And because I wasn't blocking, I wasn't necessarily learning the moves as quickly. But I do think it's a very interesting way of expanding, as opposed to, you pick these moves up in the environment, or in the beginning of each level, you get a new move, or you have them all from the beginning and you have no idea how to use any of them. I think it's a very interesting way that kind of emphasizes the fighting game / Dark Souls mechanic of you're going to fight all these guys in this area over and over again until you kind of get the hang of it and master it.
Yeah, for sure.
So in terms of story, what did you think?
It's vague. I liked the world they built. This you start as a prospect, and you have to go and fight until you can become an Absolver. I don't really remember what either of those things mean, but I know you're in this world where all these other prospects are here, but most of them are lost, and they've given up, and so they're just gone wild and start attacking you. And these are the people you have to fight in order to survive.
Yeah, and so you're kind of going around fighting these trash mobs, and then there are certain marked ones who you are fighting. I don't think there's a whole lot of story with them, just that they're kind of superior trash mobs in a way. I guess they also count as lost prospects. They just happen to still be named. And then at some point you have to defeat all the marked ones, you fight a final boss, and then you get transported back to what I think is the real world. Did it feel like that to you? Like the whole game was in a simulation?
Yeah, it was either like a simulation or just like some other magic realm. Because at one point, so I got on, when I first started playing the game, I was able to get online pretty easily, and I played a few matches, or there were other people in the world, a la Dark Souls, where they're just kind of around. But when I was offline, I talked to a specific character, and he was like, hey, why do you choose only to be on your own plane of existence? So I get the feeling like you're on maybe a different plane than the real world, like you were saying. So you've traveled to this plane to defeat these people and become I guess a true hero Absolver, so you can go back to your world and protect it.
Yeah, and there's this really weird at the very end, the old guy who's kind of your mentor, who sent you off into this other plane, you come back to him and he says, I knew there was something special about you. Now you're an Absolver. Here's a cool cape. Now why don't you go back to the crappy dimension and keep fighting until we need you? And then he just sends you back.
I also want to know how many people he waits there for with a cloak, and just whoever shows up, he just says that to.
Yeah. Oh, you know what? Now that I think about it, didn't all the mini bosses, or some of them had cloaks, right?
I think
did only
so.
The last one?
Are we figuring out the story right now?
Yeah, that's how good this game is.
Welcome to the Absolver podcast. We'll be figuring out the lore today.
Yep, it keeps you thinking a full 30 minutes after we both beaten the game. Is that right?
Yeah, just about. What's procrastination? We don't do that here.
No, of course not. I just felt like, fighting game, there's a lot of buzz around this game, and fighting game fans and fighting game community in general is very aggressive, and so I thought if I'm going to say bad things about this game, I want to at least be able to say, yeah, but I did finish it.
Right.
As opposed to, I only beat half of it because I'm not very good at fighting games, but I'm still going to criticize it,
Yeah, that was my feeling too. I was like, I'm not going to let this game get the best of me. I'm going to go through it and beat it, and maybe I cheesed a couple bosses by pushing them off an edge, but they did it to me a couple times as well.
Yeah. Speaking of cheese and speaking of multiplayer, I was able to... So basically how multiplayer works in this game, like you were saying, is Dark Souls, but there's a little bit more of a system around it. So you see if you're online, then you see other people. You walk into an area, and then you see a text message pop up in the text box, and it basically just says, so and so has entered the area. And if you come across each other, you can, through an interact prompt, basically cooperate or choose to fight, and then do 10 different poses. So if you choose to cooperate, it doesn't change the bosses at all. So I definitely cheese 2 or 3 of the bosses by teaming up with 2 or 3 other randos and just beating them to a pulp, or rather letting the other person beat them to a pulp until they died, and then finishing the boss off after that.
Yeah, my first session when I got online was about an hour and a half, and I met this guy about halfway through, and he like bowed at me, and I bowed at him, and then he was like, "Hey, did the co-op thing?" And I was like, "Sure." So I followed him, and he led me to the first, because I was dressed in all the rags when you start, and he led me to the first guy. We fought him, killed him.
I'm sorry. What this sounds like, are you talking about Absolver or like a midnight rendezvous in a Denny's parking lot?
Oh, sorry, in New York City, it's very dangerous. This is my afternoon. Anyways, he had candy. So he leads me there, and we beat him, and then I guess co-op ends once you beat a boss, because then he killed me.
Oh, yeah, that's okay. That's actually the perfect segue into some of the bugs and issues that I had with the game. And one of them is it's very easy to accidentally punch other people that you are cooperatively fighting with.
Yes.
Because melee, especially the fights, is literally just fist and legs going everywhere, and it's hard to kind of determine where they're going to go. So basically, if you punch somebody once or twice, it's just like you're acting hostile, and it either puts you directly into a fight, or it at minimum kicks you out of the cooperation. So that's probably what happened, is both of you were probably swinging a bit too hard, and all of a sudden it went hostile.
Oh, true. But to their credit, enemies can also punch each other, which is
great.
how I killed a couple enemies.
Yeah. Yeah. So in terms of other bugs, there were some issues that I had. There was one day when I got on the game and I said, I've got about 30 minutes to kill before I have things to do in the real world. And so I booted the game up, and I punched one enemy, and then I could no longer punch anymore. All my other buttons in the controller were working except for any attacks. So I died, and it kept doing that for about 10 minutes until I finally shut the game off and stopped playing for a full day. Did you encounter anything weird like that?
The only bugs, nothing like that. I got caught on a couple corners and just danced into oblivion. It just bounced up and down like rapidly until I was like, I just need to get out of here. But other than that, I didn't know huge game breaking bugs like mechanically.
Yeah. The only kind of, I wouldn't call it jankiness, but just like the bit of unpolish that was really aggravating me was it's kind of the character movement and the camera, because kind of once you lock onto an enemy, you can't really control the camera at all anymore. So there would be situations where I would be fighting an enemy and we would end up on a tilted slope, and the camera would be literally right between my groin, looking at the chin of the enemy, and it was just terrible. And then other moments where I would kind of be near a ledge and there would be an enemy, and once you start throwing punches, etc., your feet start kind of dancing a lot. So I would be like 3 feet from an edge and I would throw a punch, and I would take too many steps forward with that punch and fall off the edge. And that happened to me all the way through the end of the game, just in terms of it felt kind of hard to control the actual movement of your character once you were in combat. Did it feel like that to you?
Yeah, especially with the camera, that was the weirdest. Like, you'd auto lock on sometimes when running through an area, and then I would forget how to lock off, and I would just hit B because that's what I naturally would do, and I just start dashing, and I look like an idiot. And then as far as falling off the edge, I fell off the edge hundreds of times because you're locked on, you'll dodge one way, fall off the edge, or you'll be punching someone and they won't have fallen off the edge yet, so they kind of fall down a little bit, and then your character punches again, they fall down, you move forward, you're still on it, but somehow the like locked on target just pulls you off the edge.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, that was happening to me a lot. I thought I was getting real cheeky, pushing enemies off ledges, and they'd fall, and then I'd fall a half second behind them. It's pretty terrible. I think that's is there anything big that we're missing about the game? Anything other you want to mention?
No, I really like the art style. I like the look of the world. It's kind of like a muted. I don't know. It almost feels like it's. You can really tell it with. I don't know. I want to say Pixar. I don't know if that's a weird descriptor, but it's got this weird animated world feel about it, like some college kids animation final.
Yeah, I feel like it's like Big Hero 6,
Yeah,
but fantasy.
totally.
Yeah, I think that's the best way to describe it. I wish I do really like the style, but I feel like what kind of killed it for me was the level design. As weirdly as that sounds, I just started getting frustrated by all the same environment, seeing it over and over again. Great assets and textures and visuals, etc., but not being able to actively discern them in the environment as here's a good path, here's a clear way to go, here's where you need to be. That was kind of frustrating to me. As oddly as that sounds, the game design for me kind of took away from the visuals.
Yeah, I would say that. I would say that about a lot of video games, not just Absolver in general. But yeah, it definitely the winner of this combination was totally the mechanics, and the faults with that detracted from the beautiful setting as well.
Yeah. So I think as a general wrap up, what would you give it on the Gamehumanity 3-point scale? Kind of that trinary ultimate of all games. Is it an avoid? Is it a consider? Is it a recommend?
Well, consulting the Triforce, coming into this, I was leaning. I was really in the middle, and I'm going to continue to be in the middle. I'm going to consider this game.
Yeah, I think I'm right there with you. I think there's a whole lot here, especially if you're a fighting fan. If you're interested in this game, you're probably going to enjoy it. It's only $29.99, and I'm pretty sure that there's a sale on for launch, at least with the Steam version that drops it to $27. So there's a lot there if you're into fighting games, especially atypical fighting games. But I think if you're not really that interested in it, then you're not really missing a whole lot. Does that sound about right?
Yeah, and the developers have said this a bunch of times. There's a ton of content for after the campaign. We both just finished the campaign. There's combat trials. There's a lot. This game is hugely tuned towards one-on-one combat with other players. A lot of my time was spent offline, so this isn't with it. I mean, with any game, you can only spend a certain amount of time with it. So there are promises of a lot of content that is after the campaign that you can do on your own.
Yeah, and so as we're wrapping up, I just realized a very good comparison point. This game feels like For Honor, but in a way that makes the combat actually feel like your own, like you're in more control of it, not just in terms of customizing the moves, but it's not just a matter of there are 3 options to hold your weapon and then attack based off that, but a whole lot more stances. Did you ever play For Honor?
Yeah, and I would completely agree with you.
Yeah. So, hard-hitting comparisons right at the very end of the review when they almost don't matter. So, overall, that's our Gamehumanity Duo review for Absolver. Once again, that's from Slow Clap. I believe that's on PC and PS4. Publisher, Devolver Digital. It's going to be $29.99, I believe, on both console and PC. And overall, both Will Crosby and myself, Ian Gibson, have given it a consider. So, consider it. Once again, I'm Ian Gibson. You can find me on Twitter at ThinkGibson and on
Subpixel.
And Will, where can they find you?
They can find me on Twitter at Hunt270 and also on Subpixel.
Thank you for joining us for another episode of Duo Review. We'll see you next time.